Hello, and thanks for tuning in to what is going to be a little bit of a different video than usual. Big shout out and thank you to Marcus Aurelius over on Patreon, excellent name by the way, for commissioning this video. So thanks Marcus for sponsoring today's video. We're going to be focused and we're going to dive right in. And as you'll notice, bit of an interesting screen up here. Today's activity is going to be Keeper Mull. But in addition to that, we are also going to look at, okay, well, if I'm going to keep, how am I going to sequence it? And so we'll break down the full thought process of keep or mull, and we're going to look at it from a few different angles because as you're looking at your opening hand, you're working through a few different things. One, do I know the matchup? Two, am I going to play or draw? And three, okay, if I'm going to keep this thing, how do I play this hand? What do I do with my cards to maximize them? And so right now I have a vaguely curated a hand up here because I have kind of an interesting one that I wanted to start with. But from here on out it'll be um, random hands basically. And what we'll do, we'll skip past the easy ones for the most part, and we'll focus our discussion on the hands that look difficult, that are hard to navigate. And just quickly taking a peek at our deck list, pretty stock mono red aggro. The main deck is just a few cards of what I have in my flex slot sideboard guide right now, but it won a recent challenge and I like this list a lot. And the sideboard is the sideboard that I currently have in my flex slot, which I like a lot. I think it's nice and balanced. Um, but with that, we'll jump right into this first hand that I've set up for us, which is a great hand. It's nearly a snap keep. Um, but the reason that I wanted to start with a hand like this is to talk about the aggro matchup specifically, which is more popular than ever right now. You really need to nail your aggro mirrors if you want to do well with aggro. And so the great thing about this hand is I have threats, I have interaction, and I have lands to do all of these things. Ideally one of those mountains would maybe be a rock face village, but overall this hand is amazing. Nothing too interesting to that. But the sequencing is is where things start to get interesting because whether I'm on the play or the draw, it's going to be really tempting to play that Heartfire Hero on turn one. Exceedingly tempting to play that Heartfire Hero on turn one. But there's a couple reasons you don't want to do that. First, the obvious one. If you're playing against another red deck, that's kind of the scenario we're in right now. You're on the play, you're playing against another red deck. Turn one, Heartfire Hero, pass. The issue is they have at least 4 shocks in their deck. Some lists are on 6. That's just game one. And so you're really just offering up your Heartfire Hero for nothing. Whereas, and I'm not saying you need to wait until you have a Monstrous Rage to cast your Heartfire Hero, but if you have a Monstrous Rage, that makes your Heartfire Hero 3/3, and it doesn't die to shock. And the great thing about Magic is your opponent, unless they play Duress or Thoughtseize, which again we're talking about red mirrors, they don't know what's in your hand. And so anytime you have a Heartfire Hero on the board, if you have 1 mana available, it's very hard for your opponent to target it with a shock. Because there's immense risk that if they do that and you have a Monstrous Rage, they've completely wasted their shock. And so we want to wait until we can at least bluff that we can protect this Heartfire Hero. Running him out on turn one, whether we're on the play or the draw, is really just asking to be, I wouldn't say blown out, but we just have one over threat. We don't want to give away our Heartfire Hero for nothing. We want to save him. Furthermore, there's even more impetus to not cast that Heartfire Hero because we have a Burst Lightning of our own. And on the play, land pass holding up Burst Lightning isn't exceedingly exciting. I'm probably not going to want to use that burst right away, but if my opponent gives me a Heartfire Hero or a Hired Claw for free, I'll take it. There's a couple Swift Spears in this deck, but by and large it's not a prowess deck, and taking the free creature early isn't the sexiest play, but it's worth it. The bigger money comes in when you're on the draw. Against another mouse deck, I love Mountain Pass holding up Burst Lightning because there's a lot of times where people think it's correct to just play their cards. And sometimes it is correct to just play your cards. But against a deck with 4 to 6 shocks, it's very much not. Because in a lot of scenarios, you'll get to use your Burst Lightning as effectively a spell snare. Which, if you're not familiar, is a very, very powerful modern card. For 1 blue mana, you get to counter a spell that costs 2 mana. Really efficient, really great thing to do on the draw to help you, catch up from being on the draw. Well, if my red opponent on turn 2 thinks, well, my Heartfire hero lived, let me play my Manifold Mouse and start doing my double strike thing. Well, they resolve their Manifold Mouse. And then you Burst Lightning their Manifold Mouse. It dies having done nothing. You've effectively spell snared it. You upgraded your Burst Lightning to a, modern staple counterspell. That's great value. The same thing is true for Emberheart Challenger. And, people just do this a lot. And so when you're on the draw, Mountain Pass holding up Burst Lightning is a very, very powerful play. You can often get a lot of value out of it. And even if your opponent is heads up, what you've done is, if they play into it, that's best case scenario. You've spell snared their 2-drop. If they don't play into it, you've forced them to slow down, and now they haven't played their 2-drop. And if they have their interaction, they're fine with that. But there are plenty of hands that don't have interaction where just by forcing them to slow down, you really gain some tempo and some power from that mountain that you left available. Um, okay, so talking about multiple matchups, I think, overall, this hand is good against something like black mid range or black bounce deck. I'm a little less excited, but I still think it's good. It it depends on which version exactly. Standard's got a ton of great decks, but if I'm playing against Esper Bounce, for example, Burst Lightning feels good against Scavenger, Lightning Strike against Fear of Isolation, and, other than that, I'm not super excited about this hand. I'd rather be threat dense and putting a lot of pressure on my opponent. Without that Monstrous Rage to support my Heartfire hero, and Screaming Nemesis is one of our weaker main dex cards against Esper, just because, again, without Monstrous Rage, there's pretty much no chance for it to survive. It's just gonna get nowhere to run. So a lot more medium against something like a black mid-rangey deck. I really want to be more threat dense, but it still kind of feels at the low end of keepable. For example, I think one of the matchups to talk about is In the Blind, because, right now everyone's preparing for various regional championships, but playing online, you're in the blind. And so, In the Blind, this is a hand that I just keep. It's great in aggro mirrors, and against other decks, it's perfectly solid. Not the sexiest thing, but perfectly solid. Again, against the bounce and the black mid range kind of decks, I'm not excited at the proposition of just giving my Heartfire hero away. So I'm not going to play him on turn 1. I want to at least wait until turn 2 where I can bluff that I have a Monstrous Rage. And taking this kind of line where you mountain pass, and then on turn 2, you play another mountain, and you play the Heartfire hero and you hold up the mountain, it kind of telegraphs to your opponent that you have the Monstrous Rage. If someone's playing very heads up and watching your lands and really like doing all the things that you do at high level play, they're going to read that as there's a very good chance that you have Monstrous Rage, and that significantly changes what removal they feel confident firing off at Heartfire Hero. Um, so just really important to remember that even though this hand doesn't have a Monstrous Rage, you can still leverage the threat of Monstrous Rage in order to try to keep Heartfire Hero alive. Whereas serving him up on turn one is just kind of giving him away for free. And sometimes those one for ones are okay, but not in a hand like this where I'm not super threat dense. Um, that said, against any kind of control deck where I'm trying to get off to a hot start, there's a chance that against something like Domain or Control I mulligan this. It's really hard to mulligan. It's one of those that falls in that gray area where I could go either way. But if I do keep it, I'm playing my hero on turn one because I'm not expecting my opponent to. I mean, I forget the name of the white one that exiles a creature and lets me gain life, but by and large, it's not until they have 2 mana that we start to see removal spells, and oftentimes beans will come down on turn two or something like that. So against a much slower deck like Control, we're going to kind of get the party started right away and hope we draw well. And that hope we draw well sentiment is the thing that makes me think, I could probably find a better six. Um, Really hard decision. I think it would be okay either way to keep or mull if you knew you were playing against control deck. I probably lean closer to mulliganing, but it's just really hard because you've got 4 non-lands, 3 lands. Um, I can't say for sure if I would mulligan it, but if I saw anyone mulligan this against a um, control deck, I would I would be a little impressed. I'm not gonna lie, because I don't know if I could. The other thing that this hand has that maybe as I continue to really like stew on this hand, that really pushes it into actually I think I would keep this no matter what. Is we do have Burst Lightning plus Screaming Nemesis, which is a very potent combo against control decks. Um, it's a little hard to pull off. Um, in general, you're probably going to need 4 mana to pull it off. Which this hand is only 1 land away from doing that. But it also means that Burst Lightning and Screaming Nemesis are kind of not cards that you want to touch in the first few turns because you're trying to save them for turn four. So again, we're in a. I hope I draw well, so I have things to do, and I can set myself up to where maybe my opponent plays Temporary Lockdown, and I get a window to do Screaming Nemesis plus Burst Lightning, which is going to put me in a really good spot to eventually win this game. Um, Tough one, tough one. Um, Great hand against aggro, pretty solid against the black bounce mid range, very borderline against control decks. Um, and I don't think in any case player draw significantly pushes me one way or another. I will say, one of these mountains being a either rock face or a soulstone would make this hand a lot better for me against a control deck. But yeah, I mean, somehow I spent at least 10 minutes talking about this hand. I didn't expect that. But there's a lot of analysis that goes into, keep, mull, and how am I going to sequence this thing. So let's see what, by the way, our friends at FlexSlot are, giving us this great feature so that we can roll through these hands. This is a snap keep. It looks pretty similar to the last one. Um, not one I'm gonna spend much time talking about. Definitely, again, thank you, Marcus, and his idea, which I like a lot, is to focus on the tough hands. So if I go through a hand quickly, it just means I think it's a clear keep. And if you don't think it's a clear keep, feel free to ask me about the hand. Wow, we're getting some amazing hands. This is a banger. Wow, that's incredible. This deck is so good. It only has good hands. 1, 2, 3. Jeez. Okay. Not a tough one, but it's finally not a tough one in the other direction. This really isn't a deck where you want to keep one landers. If it's going to be a one lander, it's going to have to be like a real banger, and I'm going to have to be on the draw, and it better have like one, like that one land better be accompanied by 6 1 drops. And even still, if I'm on a 7, I'm probably going to mulligan it. It's very important that we have a very high bar for our 7s. Once you get to 6, I'm going to start considering the possibility of a one lander. This is not a one lander that I would keep as a 6. Um, but your 7s, I'm almost never going to keep a one lander with this deck. This is insane. I I I rolled through so many like interesting hands trying to get to that first hand, and then now every hand is just a banger. Um, no, this is also a great hand. Wow. Okay, here we go. This is a great hand to talk about a little bit. So what do I like? What do I dislike? I like these cards. Hand has good cards. I have interaction and I have threats. That's something I'm going to be very excited about against red decks, and something that, in general, in the blind, makes me feel quite comfortable. In the blind, I want to be ready for anything, and a hand with both threats and interaction lets me be ready for anything. Against aggro is where I want to balance developing my game plan with disrupting my opponent's game plan, so I'm very happy to see both threats and interaction. Furthermore, double nemesis against another red deck, it's like, boy, if I draw that land, this is going to be a really tough game for my opponent. Taking it to the next matchup bracket, those black mid-rangey or bounce decks. This hand looks not super attractive. My manifold mount, not starting the game until I have a 2 drop in play, is pretty difficult because, again, running out a naked 2 drop puts you at risk of losing that to just like any removal spell in the format. If you play the manifold mouse on turn 2, it can die to just anything. Against bounce decks that are loaded with nowhere to runs, and those screaming nemesis at the top end, not very exciting. And again, I have this problem that I have 2 lands and multiple nemesis. If I'm on the draw, I'm gonna consider keeping this hand, but overall, against a black mid-range deck or bounce deck on the play, I'm definitely gonna send this back. It feels bad to send back a hand that has lands and spells in that nice 2 to 5 ratio. Um, but this hand starts slow, and it's gonna be really hard to deploy that manifold mouse and make it do anything other than just eat a removal spell. Um, so yeah, and on the draw where I get one more card, anything can happen with that one card, and I'm that much more likely to hit that land drop and be able to play these nemesis. So I would consider it on the draw. On the play, I would begrudgingly send it back. And then, against the control decks, we again have Burst Lightning plus Nemesis. So that's pretty attractive. But again, on the play, really, really don't like the 2 lands double Nem. Yes, there's 20 more in the deck. Um, but our 7s, we have a high bar. It's 2 mountains again against those like controlling decks, the domain. I really want to see some utility lands. So on the play, I just think this 7 is like a little slow and risky. On the draw, where I get one extra card, I'm that much more likely to hit my land drop. I have 2 NEMs that can't get swept up by temporary lockdown. I'm going to consider it. I think it's risky, but I'm going to consider it. Uh, Doubling back to Red Aggro, this is definitely a keep. On the draw, it's a snap keep. We just talked about how great Mount and Go holding up Burst Lightning is on the draw, so I'm really excited about that. On the play, it's not without risk. Um, Mount and Go is a little bit less exciting when you're on the play, but it's not bad. We have multiple interaction spells. Manifold Mouse, potentially hangs out long enough to get Offsprung. Nemesis is amazing in the matchup. I I think no matter what, you have to keep it, but there's definitely more risk involved in keeping this hand. The one caveat I want to make that I should have kind of brought up during the last one is that against mouse decks has basically been what we've been talking about when we talk about aggro, but now we have Visit Prowess as effectively the number one aggro deck. It took over in Bologna and has been incredibly popular. And there's a pretty big problem with my statement that Mount and Go holding up Burst Lightning can turn it into a spell snare. um, that problem is that the blue red Prowess deck, they're probably going to either plot Slick Shot, play Corey Steel Cutter, or maybe run out a couple one mana spells. In any case, their two drops don't get hit by Burst Lightning. That's part of the beauty of the deck, is that they can plot Slick Shot on turn two, or they can play Corey Steel Cutter on turn two. And either way, your Burst Lightning is not able to hit their two drop directly. Well, I'm going to stop myself from going on a tangent about the Prowess deck, because we're here to talk about Mono Red and the mulls on that. But playing against it, that Mount and Go doesn't feel quite as good unless they play a one drop, and then you do get to kill their Swiss Spear, or you get to kill their Otter with, um, they don't get the Prowess, they don't get in for two, or they don't get in for one if they plot Slick Shot. But the Mount and Go is very exciting against a mouse deck, less so against the Prowess deck. And I'd even go far as to say that this could potentially be a mulligan against the Prowess deck, depending on what version they're on. The more aggressive versions could easily kind of, well, you do have Burst Lightning and Lightning Strike, so I think you probably just have to keep this hand. You have double Nemesis, and that's your best mirror card. Um, but I'm sweating a little bit more against Prowess than I am against Mice. I think this hand is just perfect against Mice. Against the Prowess deck, deck's really good, so I'm a little bit nervous about it. But it's not the perfect hand. No one drop. Starting the game with Manifold Mouse can be hard, but we can definitely have that ability to play a bit more controlling on the first couple turns. Maybe Nemesis hopefully comes out on turn three because we hit our land drop, and then who knows? Manifold Mouse maybe just comes down off-sprung later in the game after you've found another mouse, because the Burst Lightnings and Nems, I'm gonna say Nems, do a good job helping you keep the board under control. Um, this hand is a banger. I would just continue to hammer home that playing Heartfire Hero on turn one is a big risk against red decks. Um, no real reason to take that risk with this hand. Play him on turn two, hold up your Monstrous Rage, and then you've got double Nem. So this is exciting against mono red. It's solid in the blind. I've got this curve, so I'm excited because I actually finally have the Monstrous Rage to help protect Heartfire Hero, and yeah, great curve, great cards. Let's talk about this hand. We finally have a Tursa in hand, which I think is pretty interesting for the keeper mull equation. She can definitely potentially bait you, but I am keeping this hand. I have threats, I have interaction, and while 4 lands isn't exciting, 2 of them are utility lands, and I have Tursa to get rid of at least one of them. We'll see how many lands we draw to decide, maybe we get to get rid of a second one too. Um, but this hand is nice because I've got Burst Lightning and Heartfire Hero, which means no matter what I'm up against, I'm pretty happy with my early game. Having those two cards means if I feel like I need to interact, I can interact. If I'm, trying to curve out, I can curve out. And what's great is against something like a control-y deck, it's perfectly strong to turn one Heartfire Hero, turn two Rockface the Heartfire Hero. Get in for 3. Don't deploy extra threats to give more value to their lockdown. Um, so you have this great way to be mana efficient on turn 2 against the more controlling decks. Um, we don't have that Monstrous Rage. So against the black decks, I'm a little, nervous. It's not necessarily correct to run out Heartfire Hero on turn 1 against them. Um, but sometimes, you have a hand where you're willing to take that risk. If I'm playing against an optimistic scavenger deck or a deck where I feel like I can get value out of that early burst lightning, then maybe I'll go ahead and hold back the Heartfire Hero. But looking at this hand, I really want to go turn 1 Heartfire Hero, turn 2 Village the Hero, unless I'm playing against specifically red. And so I'll take the risk against one of those black decks and see what happens, because I am going to run out Tursa on turn 3, draw a couple cards, at least one, maybe 2. And if I'm only drawing 1, that means I drew other gas that I'm excited to have. So this is a hand where I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and start the game early. But I feel great having the Rockface Village to fall back on. And I think, one of the interesting decisions that's going to come up on turn 3, again, depending on your draws, but let's assume you don't draw another land. There's a bit of an interesting question of, do I want 2 Rockface Village or do I want 2 mountains? And I would probably go based on the context of my hand. And if I have more creatures, I'm like fine and happy to have double Rockface. If I've got like Monstrous Rage, Burst Lightning, Lightning Strike, then I probably need double Mountain. Having 4 mana and 2 Rockface Villages is not nothing. The double activation, depending on kind of how your hand shapes, is something that can potentially happen. The safer play is to keep 2 mountains in a Rockface. But there's scenarios where you're gonna feel okay taking that risk and keeping 2 rock faces. Who knows? Maybe you just draw all mountains and you're like, okay, well, let's get rid of 2 mountains, and I still have 4 lands, which are 2 mountains and 2 rock faces. And play draw. How does play draw make me feel about this hand? I think everything I said so far applies to the play, and I feel quite confident about all that on the play. On the draw, this hand looks a lot worse, to be honest. That turn 1 Heartfire Hero plan, I think against control it's still fine. Any kind of controller domain. Against a black mid-range deck or a bounce deck, I think this hand is probably not it. The 3 drops dying to nowhere to run. You have to remember that when you discard lands to Tursa, there's no guarantee that you don't draw more lands. So probably on the draw against a mid-range or bounce deck, I'm going to seriously consider mulliganing this. It's tough. There's good cards here. I'm, glad to see all these cards, but also the deck just has a bunch of good cards. So, on the draw against a black deck, I'm going to seriously consider mulliganing this. You know, This hand could be bait. This hand looks like a snap keep. And I think it's a keep. But I do like pause for a second and think, well, quadruple one drop. There's not a lot of high impact here, but I think it's a keep in all scenarios. I think, the 4 threats, it's definitely a keep. But my sequencing, I'm probably going to do some interesting things. One, clarify that I'm only going to start with Heartfire Hero if I expect to trigger Valiant on turn 2. This hand does not trigger Valiant on turn 2. My default is going to be Hired Claw. I want to play my creatures without haste before I play my creatures with haste in order to maximize damage. However, if we go to the next level, when we expect our creature to die to removal, we want to play out our worst creature. And Swift Spear is probably the worst creature in this hand. We could draw a Rage Burst Strike. We can draw into being excited about Swift Spear. But the other thing is I have 2 Swift Spears, whereas I only have 1 Heartfire Hero. So if I had 2 heroes and 1 Swift Spear, I'd start with Hero. Since I have 2 Swift Spears, I'm going to start with Swift Spear and, just test the waters. Assuming I'm in the blind or playing against aggro or playing against a black deck. Against a more controlling deck, I'm definitely going to start with Hired Claw because I'm just simply trying to maximize damage. But against decks that threaten to kill my 1-drop without too much effort, I am going to run out that Swift Spear and test the waters, see if she lives or not. Because with this hand, she's just a 1/2 with haste. Can easily draw into more gas, but Hired Claw is such a strong, independent threat. It can grow itself, and when you find multiples, it's just so good. One against a more controlling deck, I'm definitely going to start the game with Hired Claw because it effectively attacks as a 2/2 on turn 2. And if I draw another Hired Claw, it attacks as a 3/2 on turn 2, which is really good stuff. But anything threatening to kill my 1-drop, I'll play the Swift Spear and, test the waters, see what happens. Excellent hand, 5 stars. Terrible hand, 0 stars. Now. Ooh. Great hand. Good. Ooh. No, this one's not borderline. I would say, don't get baited by the Soulstone here. This is a good hand. You have like Hero, Emberheart, Manifold. You just have a whole value train ready to chow down on your opponent. If Nemesis wasn't here, I might say on the draw against aggro, no interaction, pretty sketchy. Nemesis can go a long way into clawing you back into a game. It is still a little sketchy on the draw against aggro. I'll say that it's one of those hands that, sometimes I look at a hand, it's a hand that's maybe not right for the matchup or maybe not right for the play draw scenario, but sometimes a hand is just too generically powerful to let go of. If you're doing really powerful things, you're on a good track. And yes, on the draw against aggro, it's ideal to have interaction, But just like I'm sitting here saying, well, this hand's probably too good, I have to keep it. It's possible that your opponent is doing the same thing, but looking at a hand that is a little slower, is, a little more interaction than threat, in which case, we're actually okay with that. We have so many threats, we're of course okay with some of them dying. So we have these roles that we expect to be in. On the draw against aggro, I expect that I'm going to need my interaction. On the play against aggro, I expect that I'm going to want to go fast. But, as we talked about, if you're on the play against aggro and your opponent goes Mountain Go and has a Burst Lightning, this can be a really, really effective way to just like make your turn two kind of suck if you're not playing Corey Steel Cutter, Slick Shot, Swift Spear plus Monstrous Rage. There's a lot of way that just a simple Burst Lightning can make your fast start slow down a lot. And so your role in the matchup is not guaranteed. Maybe you are on the draw and really desperately need that interaction because your opponent's hand looks exactly like this, and you both have this kind of near perfect curve out, and because they're on the play, they win the game. That's going to happen sometimes, but pretty often you're going to have these complex, interesting battles where your who's the beatdown role passes back and forth a lot. And so on the play against aggro, this is a snap keep. I'm really excited about this. I'm putting a ton of pressure on my opponent. On the draw, I think a lot of people would mulligan this. And I think it's okay to mulligan it. But I think it's seriously worth considering as a keep. Because you're just not guaranteed to be in that super defensive role against another mono red mouse deck where they're also playing a lot of interaction. Or even against Izzet, there's a number of builds that are more kind of tempo focused. We saw Thunder Trap Trainer coming out this weekend. We obviously see stock up as a 4 of in almost all the lists. And so while some lists and some hands are super fast and you really got to slow them down, some hands are not. And a hand like this that's just chock full of cast can really punish them. So, maybe if this is game 3, I'm really thinking about how has my opponent been playing and how do I think this game will go? Because if my opponent has been on the more passive side of the aggro spectrum, I'm probably going to keep this. I'm probably feeling pretty good about this. If my opponent has been super aggressive and just kind of ignoring my board and trying to race me every game, then yeah, I got to mulligan this on the draw for sure. But you can implement a bit of like people reading and soft skills here to try and figure out, can I just keep this really strong threat dense hand and steal the beatdown roll, or is my opponent just ignoring me and racing me, in which case, while this is a good racing hand, no racing hand is good enough on the draw in just a stone cold race. So a pretty interesting one. The sequencing, not so much. I'm just going to play my cards. I got a bunch of threats. I'm going to make something happen. But I think on the draw, there's a lot of merit, and I would, I think trying to read your opponent is something that's a little underrated. Not to say that if they're just blindly racing you in the first 2 games, it's guaranteed that they're going to do it again. But I really love trying to kind of read my opponent and think about what they're going to do, not just what their deck is going to do. And this is a spot where maybe that is going to be the deciding factor. If this were, against an aggro deck on the draw. Uh, if there were a Rage in this hand Tersa Nemesis, instead of Tersa or Nemesis, this is one of those one-landers that I would consider. Especially if it was a 6 and I'm on the draw. Like, as a 6 on the draw, Tersa or Nemesis is a Monstrous Rage. I keep this. I bottom Tersa or Nemesis, and I keep Mountain, Hero, Swiss Spear, Frenzy, Monstrous Rage. Um, and the cool thing here is having Rage plus Heartfire Hero plus Witchstalker Frenzy means that, of course I could need to Frenzy something on my opponent's side of the board. Um, but there's also a possibility that if my opponent gives me an early window to get my hero to 3/3, and maybe I draw into a Valiant Trigger, which this deck is pretty good at, and I get Heartfire Hero up to 4/4, and maybe that Witchstalker Frenzy just eventually finds my big fat Heartfire Hero to deal 5 to my opponent's face or 4 to my opponent's face, and just end the game with Heartfire Hero's Death Trigger. Yeah, and that kind of goes for any deck, any matchup really. If we're kind of pretending this is a 6 and one of these two cards is a Monstrous Rage, there are hands where finesse kind of goes out the window. I have 3 threats, I have a Rage, I have a Witchstalker Frenzy. I really want to resolve Rage on Heartfire Hero. So I have 2 heroes. I'll start with Hero. Hopefully my opponent spends their mana on turn 1 or turn 2, and I can just resolve that Monstrous Rage, get my hero up to 3/3, and start building towards that bomb finish. But if the first hero dies, I'm going to be more conservative with the second hero. So probably hero comes out first, then Swiss Spear, and then that third hero is going to be the last threat out of my hand. This also is an illustration of one of my favorite ways to start the game as the aggro player. Turn 1 Heartfire Hero, turn 2 if I hit the land drop and go Swiss Spear, and I can resolve Monstrous Rage on the Heartfire Hero. This is a really exciting start because 1, it's 7 damage on turn 2, which is exciting, and 2, now I have a 3/3 Heartfire Hero, which doesn't die to shocks, and is 1 Valiant Trigger away from not dying to Nowhere to Run, Elspeth Smite, Lightning Strike, and I still have that Swiss Spear hanging out to make all of my, non-creature spells a little more potent. So definitely an opener to look out for. But as this hand is, it's just a mulligan. But interesting to explore if one of these guys was a Rage and I was on a 6. Because that's a spot where, a rare occasion where I'm keeping that one lander. And, we'll see what happens. I'd rather roll the dice on that than go to 5. This is not that one lander. Oh. Again, if it's a 6, I'd probably get rid of the third hero. If it's a 6 and I'm on the draw, get rid of the third hero and try this. Hoping to, hit my land drop and combine Manifold Mouse and Heartfire Hero. Winning with 5 cards is hard. Not that I would say I never go to 5. A lot of the one landers that we've skipped so far, I wouldn't keep them as a 6. This is one that's close enough. I'd take the risk on a 6. Great hand. Start the game with Hired Claw. Go from there. Hired Claw attacking for 3 on turn 2 is just so sweet that you got to go for it. Especially because you have the opportunity to attack for 3. That means that you have at least one backup threat. In this case, we have 2 backup threats. Important thing to note is that as you're sequencing this, you're going to play Mountain Hired Claw. And then make sure on turn 2, 1, don't mess around, start with your land drop. 2, play that second Hired Claw. 3, go to combat. Do not tap out before combat. Because if your opponent has allowed you to go to your turn, you now get to pretend you have Monstrous Rage. Maybe you drew Monstrous Rage, but even if you didn't, you get to pretend you have it. And so by holding up that mana, you signal to your opponent that they can't cast Shock, they can't cast Cut Down, they can only really cast a premium removal spell or Elspeth's Might. But you really want to hold up that mountain and, make your opponent think about Monstrous Rage. And I can't tell you how many times, someone doesn't kill the 1-drop and then thinks they can kill it on my turn too. And then it's like, oh shoot, that mountain's kind of hanging out there, huh? If you have Monstrous Rage, that totally blows me out. So I guess I have to take this 3 damage because I don't want to have my removal spell countered and give you a free pass to resolve Monstrous Rage and deal 3, maybe 4 extra damage, depending on what's on the board. So if your opponent does let you untap with your 1-drop on the board, punish them. Use that open mana to make it hard or even impossible to cast their 1-mana removal spell. Great hand. Great hand. I think, I'm really going to keep it simple here. This is a hand that curves out beautifully. I'm going to play my Hired Claw. On turn 2, it does get a little bit interesting. Against a controlling deck, well, no, even against that, I think Emberheart Challenger is really hard to cast on turn 2. And if you can do something else, you usually should. This is probably one where, again, I'm leveraging that, my mountain signals Monstrous Rage. So leaving up the mountain is pretty good. And on turn 2, I'm probably casting Swift Spear. If my opponent tapped out, I'm happy to get that 2 damage and just like, all right, I'll get in with Emberheart Challenger, but I'm going to stay very open to possibilities on turn 2. If my opponent is tapped out, I have both the option of putting a counter on Hired Claw or casting Emberheart Challenger. If I have found the 3rd land, maybe I'm fine with just putting a counter on Hired Claw. If I found a Monstrous Rage and my opponent's tapped out, maybe I want to play Swift Spear Monstrous Rage. If I just found a second Emberheart Challenger, then it's like, okay, well, let's run out another challenge. Like, let's run out one of the challengers. I'm not as worried about Challenger dying. So, if opponent taps out and gives you a free pass, you kind of go for it. Just gonna really depend what you draw. If my opponent has mana available, then I really don't want to just give them Emberheart Challenger for free. I would probably play Swift Spear because I want to use some of my mana. If my opponent has mana, I don't feel confident activating Hired Claw, and I don't really want to give them Emberheart Challenger for free. And so I end up in this spot where I'm probably casting Swift Spear on turn 2 and probably going to deal 3 damage because, again, that mountain makes it really hard for your opponent to do something. Unless they're, just playing their cards and not reading what you're doing. And then it's like, well, at least Swift Spear died instead of Challenger, or Hired Claw died, but I still dealt damage. Sequencing, pretty interesting on this one, but obviously a great hand. This is a cool hand because it's amazing. Except Soulstone Sanctuary. That Soulstone really puts a wrench in everything because all our spells cost 1 mana. Meaning this is effectively a 1-lander. but it's a really good one-lander. So let's try to go through. Boy, even just thinking about the blind, this is a really tough decision. I would be tanking on this hand for a while. And I think it would be really, really hard to mulligan this hand. I don't know if it would be explicitly wrong, because, as I said, it's kind of a one-lander. It's effectively a one-lander. Soulstone here is really not doing anything except being a 4-mana creature. But it's a really good one-lander, which I guess by that logic, on the draw, I think I just have to keep this. I have to. It's too good. I mean, look at it. It's beautiful. So on the draw, my headspace is, this is the perfect one-lander. I'm going to keep it. And I'm either playing Hired Claw or Heartfire Hero on turn 1. And honestly, it's already a hard decision. But I think what I would say is that, again, unless I'm triggering Valiant on turn 2, Hired Claw is the better play. However, if I expect my first creature to eat removal, I want to play my worst creature. And right now I do have a Monstrous Rage in hand. So Manifold Mouse is really good. But I have Heartfire Hero. But I have 2 Heartfire Heroes. And I don't have 2 Monstrous Rages. So I think, based on play draw, based on my matchup, against a control deck, I expect Claw to live. I expect Claw to turn sideways. I'm going to start with Hired Claw. Against an aggro deck or, a black deck, I'm probably starting with Heartfire Hero. Because the first hero is the least valuable card in my hand. And then Hired Claw is my best independent threat. And the second Heartfire Hero is the one that I really want to carry my Monstrous Rage. And if your Heartfire Hero happens to live, maybe you draw the land and get to play Hired Claw plus Monstrous Rage. Or Monstrous Rage hold up... or Monstrous Rage hold up Burst Lightning. A whole world of possibilities opens up if you draw a non-Soulstone land and your Heartfire Hero lives. On the draw, I think I'm like sweating a little bit, but it's just too good. I gotta keep it, and I use those kind of rules to determine what I play first. On the play, I would be so pissed, but I would... Oh, I still can't... I think it's too good. I think I've said this once already in the video, so now I'm going to say it a second time. If you were on the play and you mulliganed this hand, I would be so impressed. I would shake your hand. Because I think it's probably correct, but it would be really hard, and I don't think that I would have the strength to mulligan this. I think I would just keep it, and there's 19 more non-Soulstone lands in the deck. I'm on the play. Playing Soulstone on turn 2 is not the end of the world. If my hero's still alive, I maybe have a window to Monstrous Rage him. If not, my turn 2 is really boring, but I just play out another threat. But it's like tolerable. It's tolerable. And if I draw a non-Soulstone land for turn 3, we're cooking now. We get to cast 2 spells, and we're excited. Though the one thing that I would say is that drawing Rockface Village would be fine, but it would be a little bit awkward if on turn 1 you played a threat, and on turn 2 you played another threat, And then on turn 3, you have Soulstone, Rockface, Mountain. And you have both Burst Lightning and Monstrous Rage in your hand. Which by turn 3, you might want to play one of those. But you still have the option to Rockface one of the creatures that's on board, or play, you know, the hero and put a counter on the claw. Like, the hand is still really good. You still have a lot of interesting options. But one thing I might do is if I have a free window to resolve my Monstrous Rage on Heartfire Hero, I'll take it. Using the mountain so that if my third land is a Rockface Village, well, now my hand has 2 threats left over, both of which I can cast with Rockface. And then I have the Burst Lightning, which I can use the Mountain for. So I would think a little bit about, I don't want all these instants to get stuck in my hand because I only have one Mountain and I can only cast one of them per turn. So I would be keeping that in mind as, you know, even a third level in my sequencing, and say that if on turn 2 I didn't draw the third land yet, if my opponent's tapped out, I'm going to resolve Monstrous Rage. Unless they have like a super critical threat I need to kill. But more than likely, I really want to resolve Monstrous Rage on Heartfire Hero on turn 2. To set myself up to have a good turn 3, no matter what land I draw, as long as it's not Soulstone. But I would, in my mind, a little bit be thinking about that in case I draw the Rockface Village. That said, if your opponent has open mana, don't walk into a blowout and cast Monstrous Rage. I'm just saying here, if you have the opportunity, take it. If you don't, you know, you turn your creature sideways, you deploy more threats. Banger. 10 out of 10. Great deck, great hand. Wow, that's a good one. This looks a lot like a hand we talked about earlier. I have 3 lands. Manifold Mouse, Monstrous Rage, Burst Lightning. This is better than the one we talked about earlier. But it's a hand that's a little... Oh, this is a good hand. It takes some finesse, I would say. This is a hand that's going to take a little finesse, a little patience. Let's work through it. In the blind, these are all good cards. I'm happy to have this hand. I'm worried it could potentially be slow on the draw. But in the blind, I think this is just too many good cards that, you know, I'm going to keep it. It's close to perfect, to be honest. But there's some weaknesses that we'll kind of get to as we talk about each matchup. So, against another aggro deck, keeping. Play, keep. Draw, keep. I'm honestly a little more excited on the draw because, again, I put a lot of value into like Mountain Go against mice decks when you have the Burst Lightning. Against Izzet, I guess I'd rather be on the play. I don't want to, you know, I just rather be on the play. I want to be one step ahead of them. But I'm not going to play Manifold Mouse on turn 2 because I don't want to turn their shock into Spell Snare. I want to either protect it with Monstrous Rage or probably cast Nemesis on turn 3. This hand is not ideal against Izzet, but again, you know, a lot of those builds are on the slower side, so having these powerful threats and cards is like a really good way to start the game. It's a little bit of a patient start, but that's okay. Against a black mid-range or bounce deck, that's where this hand looks pretty sketchy, especially against Nowhere to Run. This hand just dies to Nowhere to Run. Manifold Mouse dies to Nowhere to Run. Screaming Nemesis dies to Nowhere to Run. Like, basically, against a Nowhere to Run deck, I don't want to cast this Manifold Mouse until I have 4 mana to Offspring it, so hopefully I can get a little bit of value. I don't want to cast Nemesis until I have 4 mana so that I can Rage it and maybe live through Nowhere to Run. If they're an Esper deck, then like maybe I get to burst lightning their optimistic scavenger on an early turn and feel good, but I think I have to throw this away against any kind of bounce deck for sure because nowhere to run just like terminates this hand. Um, just to the 11th degree. It's slow, it's flimsy. Um, Against a more classic mid range, like the Demir mid range, they play more. They play a lot of tap effects, but they also play a lot of removal spells. There's a chance that Monstrous Rage can save Manifold from cut down, but it's a very tough decision. I think I would probably have to mulligan this hand, but I think it's a reasonable keep because you just have really powerful cards. That's the hard thing. But I think this doesn't line up particularly well against black decks, and I'm not excited about this hand. Um, Against control and domain decks, probably have to say the same thing. But once again, we have Nemesis. Like we have kind of two combos here. We have Nemesis plus Burst, and we have Manifold Mouse plus Rage. We have our Rockface Village. This hand has enough good pieces. I think on the play, I probably keep it, and it's kind of a let's see what happens. And I'm, looking for windows to make those combination punches happen. On the draw, it might just be too slow. At that point, if you cast Manifold Mouse on turn 2, they can just lock it down on their turn 3. Then you cast Nemesis, they're just gonna kill it. So like your opening hand is kind of blank. You can't play it on curve. You can't do much. So I think on the play against like a domain or a control deck, um, just the power level of my cards and the fact that I have these two cool combination punches, um, I'd probably keep this hand and hope I can find a window to pull off some of the shenanigans in it. Um, but on the draw, I think it's just too slow. I think there's a lot of hope there. Whereas on the play, I'm, a little less dependent on hope. But yeah, that will do it. That is 1 hour of keep or mull and sequencing and matchups. And um, hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you found this helpful. And feel free to ask me questions. I think there's a lot that goes into all of these decisions. And I think it's not necessarily black and white in a lot of spots. Um, I spent this activity thinking out loud as much as possible, and clearly it's not scripted. I'm just sitting here cycling through random hands, um, thinking through it live, so you can hear all the things that I think about as I work through a hand. And I'm sure you noticed a couple times where I thought about a hand, and the more I thought about it or kind of came to different conclusions about it, there were a couple times where I came to a late realization. I was like, oh, wait, this hand also does this, which maybe pushes it over the edge to be playable. Or, oh, wait, actually, in this matchup, my opponent has this, which actually pushes this hand over the edge and makes it unplayable. Um, so I would encourage you to put a lot of thought into your keeps, put a lot of thought into your sequencing, and especially an open deck list, leverage the fact that it's open deck list, and make sure you're keeping a hand that can beat your opponent, and don't be afraid to mulligan when it can't. I know there's this fear of mulliganing out, FOMO. um, But going to 6 is a super normal, reasonable thing that people do all the time, and going to 6 isn't a big deal. There's this fear that like, well, if I mulligan a decent hand and then get an unplayable 6, now I'm on a 5, which does suck. Don't get me wrong. Um, But if the 7 wasn't going to win the game anyway, then what have you lost? 5s win games all the time. And if your opponent's on a 6 and you're on a 5, you're only one card down. Um, if you're on the draw, you're gonna get an extra card. There's ways to come back. So don't be afraid to mulligan, and make sure you really give a good think to what you're trying to do, what your opponent's trying to do, and can this hand be the foundation for me to win the game? Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Marcus, again, thank you so much for sponsoring and commissioning this video. And if you're on YouTube, I'm gonna like, subscribe, all that stuff. My Patreon link will be in the description. I write guides. I do coaching. Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day.